You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office and your host. In today's episode, we're talking to Julia Steele. Julia is a change speaker, trainer, and coach who works with organizations to turn their great ideas into incredible outcomes. She's the author of 2 books, Buy-In, How to Lead Change, Build Commitment, and Inspire People, and Unite, which includes 13 messages of hope and action from the VID19 Conference, which she launched in March in response to COVID-19. In this episode, Julia and I will cover many different topics, including change management, project management, leadership, and what it takes to be fearless and courageous. We talk a little bit more about her military parent upbringing and also where she came up with the idea for VID19 Conference, which was one of the first online conference events that I saw amongst the COVID pandemic. Julia shares her idea and how she made the event possible within 3 days. We talk about the chaos that is the global pandemic, what it takes to be a leader, and what are the key attributes of being successful when creating online events. So please join me in welcoming Julia to the show. Welcome, Julia, to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. There's a lot of things I would like to learn a little bit more about you, but I would like to start with what's the best thing that's happened to you the last week, and what's the most frustrating?
And the best thing that's happened this week is that all of the copies of my latest book have arrived. So being down in Melbourne, it's been quite problematic getting anything done in Melbourne during lockdown. So the fact that the book arrived and got through the Ring of Steel, and I'm able to physically hold something that I've been working on for a number of months now with others has been fantastic. It means my house is very full of books because I don't know where else to send them. But it's great to actually have them arrive.
Amazing. And I think the actual feel of touching something, as you know, projects you get to finish and you actually get to touch it. It must be such a rewarding feeling.
Yeah, especially right now when everything is so virtual, to have something tangible to hold and sit and have a cup of tea and enjoy is a nice change.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds amazing. I think, there's a lot of areas that we could probably talk about today. I am curious, though. I know that both your parents grew up in the military. Tell me a little bit about how that's maybe helped or it sort of lended itself to your career journey and your lifestyle. What sort of some of the lessons that you've learned?
Oh, look, I've had a few conversations with my dad in particular over the years, and it's no surprise to him, and certainly that I had a 20-year career in project management before I branched out on my own, because growing up in a military family, moving all over the place, we did stints in what was West Germany, the Middle East, and many different places in the UK as well. It's sort of being thrust into different situations and situations of uncertainty where you're having to figure things out. I got very good at planning very early. Once you've had to pack up your bedroom several times, every house move was a project in many ways. So even from very, very early in my life, projects and change and how we need to adapt and deal with uncertainty has just been at the forefront of just who I am and the life that I lead. And it's probably influenced an entire career in project management. It's influenced me moving to Australia and having the courage to sort of step out on my own and run my own business. So there's lots that I get to thank my parents for, but it's only really now that I'm older that I've really started to understand how much all of those stories have influenced what I now enjoy doing.
Amazing. And you've obviously learnt skills to adapt and pivot, and obviously it's not a coincidence you're in change management as one of the key sort of areas of your repertoire. I obviously can't not address the elephant in the room around the chaos and the pandemic and what now that is going on. Do you think at the moment with what is going on that leadership is is getting stronger, or do you think that it might be faltering because there's so much pressure on everybody in all these organisations and people individually as well?
I think, I mean, we both work in the industry. We both saw an extensive amount of change happening even before COVID came on the scene. And I think, I don't know many leaders that haven't led change in some way, shape or form, be it organisational, cultural, project change in some way, shape or form. Or if you haven't, then you are going to very soon, or you will have been forced to, as a result of COVID, make changes in your organisation, in your team this year. I think what I've seen this year is that no one in our lifetime has had to lead through a pandemic. Yes, we've had global financial crises and other things that have come along, but this pandemic is new for all of us, and I think it's some people have stood up and have really sort of shown their stripes in leading in an effective way, and others I think have faltered, not because they're necessarily a bad leader. It's just that this is incredibly new for a lot of us, and we have to be able to adapt to what's going on and recognize that we don't actually know, there is no playbook on this, and that we've had to figure some things out as we go.
It's really interesting. I was thinking the word playbook. I was thinking, there's no playbook, and then you took the words right out of my mouth. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, maybe now people can learn from it and obviously take those lessons and put them into hopefully no future pandemics, but obviously still dealing with it in the coming months as well. Yeah. So I wanted to touch on, you talk a lot about change is not a constant, instead it's chosen by us. Can you elaborate on that? Because I know that there'll be people that say, oh no, change is constant. So I'm curious to know, a little bit more about that.
I think so change is constant. Look, a lot's been written about it. It was constant before COVID arrived. I think what I've reflected on this year in particular is how much we change. Is it really down to our choices? And certainly, and you will have seen it in the project space before, change is often associated with people resisting it. So even though there's constant change in the world, our human instinct is to resist it because it's uncertain, or we feel scared, or we don't feel in control. Whereas if you actually if you start to realize, or if you recognize, that you actually have a choice in what is going on. So we've had a choice about the way that we work and how we adjust to what's going on with COVID. It actually gives you a sense of control back. And one of the things I write about in Unite, which is the new book I mentioned before, is that we're not uncertain, the situation is. And if you start to recognize that the situation is uncertain, I have no more or less skills than I had when COVID arrived. It's my choice now about how I use those skills to deal with the uncertainty that's there, rather than sort of sticking my head in the sand and going, I'm just going to resist what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Good answer. And I think you're right. It's interesting because although there's opportunity to learn more, it's just about what are your key strengths and what you're going to do about them, if anything. And obviously you've done that. So we'll delve into that a little bit more. One of the things I'm interested to sort of further elaborate on is organizations, and again, growing up in sort of the project management world, and I've seen that in your career as well, which I'll touch on shortly. There's a lot of requirement for organizations to minimize, and you always hear it, oh, we got to minimize change fatigue, but yet there's just an abundance of change going on. It's never going to stop. So I'm kind of curious to know, do you think that organizations need to better equip people at adapting to the change, or do you think they need a better plan to minimize the change in the first place?
Yeah, I find the whole project and change industry at the moment quite interesting, because project management has sort of come out of a world where there is a start and an end, right? In the traditional project world, in the waterfall world, projects have a start and an end date. And I see a lot of change fatigue in that space because there's multiple projects running at the same time, and often those projects are impacting the same people. But because we're looking at change through the project lens, we're treating change like it has a start and an end date as well. Whereas the reality is that change doesn't have a start and an end date. Change, as we said before, is this continual thing. And as more organizations move into Agile, which I know is something you're incredibly passionate about, Agile change is continuous, yet we're still trying to take a change management framework that has a start and an end to it, over the top. And what I would love to see is out of COVID and all of the Agile change that's come before it and during it is that we start to look at change holistically and say, how do we prepare our people for any change? Not just the change associated with this particular project, because I think that's what's creating the fatigue. Is it's not the amount of change, it's because we're compartmentalizing each one in the form of a project, and so people are trying to deal with 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or however many changes, rather than just taking those projects away and saying, over the next 3 years, we're going to change a lot, and we're going to look at the total journey, not each individual project.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's always done in isolation. That's part of the whole silo mentality, in particular the larger organizations that have legacy processes and built and structured like that. It makes it really hard, because I agree, if you don't have someone looking at it holistically, or as an organization looking at it holistically, the people that are working, the day to day, they're the ones that are impacted the most, that are most frustrated, and probably don't get their voices heard, to be honest. That's what we've seen as well, particularly in the last few years. So it's really, I think, important, like you said, looking at it holistically. I've seen a lot of organizations with their project management not even bring in a change manager, just assume the project manager can do it. I mean, sometimes they might be able to do it, but not every project manager has change management skills. What do you think organizations can do better to train their people before placing them into leadership roles? That's obviously something that some people get by default. Do you think that they need to do more about training people to be better leaders?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something, as organizations start to emerge out of COVID-19, there is a bigger conversation than just putting a change manager on a project. And I think there's a role for HR holistically to look at when we're looking at our organizational strategies, where the organization is going to go over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and recognizing that some of that will be certain, and that we can put change managers and project managers on that work, and some of it will be uncertain. And for the uncertain work, I think there's a whole bunch of training that our leaders need. And training, to me, is not just put them in a classroom. It's learning on the job. It's support. It's that whole suite of things. Is how do we give people resilience skills? We talk a lot about mental health and well-being. How do we make them more aware of what fear and anxiety means, and how do we help them deal with uncertainty and give them those sorts of skills, so that regardless of what change comes along, the leaders are able to adapt to it, and then the change managers and the project managers sort of fall in line behind. And at the moment, I feel like it's the other way around, that the project managers and the change managers are sort of leading the charge, and a lot of the leadership are trying to keep pace. Whereas if the leadership has the skills to sort of lead change holistically, then the project managers and the change managers' job is easier.
I couldn't agree more, particularly on the space that we play in around governance. Without that executive support, which is actually missing, particularly in the project management officer space, nothing effective ends up happening, because they just kind of get, it doesn't get the support that it's needed to actually make change possible. And governance is not a PMO thing, it's an organizational thing, just like change management. So it's interesting, because that's happening in the change space as well. So hopefully it improves. You touched on, obviously, mental health. Tomorrow's World Mental Health Day. You talk a lot about courage to take action and change, and obviously then the strength to see it through. Is there any advice that you could give to people listening with what's going on around us, in terms of if they're feeling at the moment that their strength is waning? Is there any advice that you can give them?
Yeah, I think there are two things that we need when it comes to change, and I am very passionate about courage in terms of taking action, but then we also need the strength to see it through. And I see a lot of organizations having the courage to take that first step, but it's the second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 100th step where things start to get hard, and that's where the strength comes through, or the strength is needed. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice is that I can give people is to recognize that every day is going to be different, and some days will be easier and harder, and that it is, sounds cliche, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. So that your strength will come and go, and to be aware of where you are on that journey, and that you can't just keep pushing day after day after day, trying to drive change through, and that you have to listen to yourself, listen to what's going on in your organization. You know, fatigue, we talked about change fatigue earlier. That fatigue is at the other end of strength, and if you want your organization to change, you have to be able to make sure everyone is strong enough to be able to do it.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's sound advice for where we are at the moment. It's a really tough time, and I think I like to say to people that, you know, even if they're not having a good day, that there's help out there. You just have to ask. It could be anyone, friend, colleague, you know, whoever it might be. Just on change as well, you know, continuing on that theme, which is really, really important right now. You talk about accelerating change in 3 ways: at an individual level, at a team level, and an organizational level. Can you explain how they're interlinked and what happens if, you know, you just focus on one and maybe not the others?
Yeah, so I think if I look at it from an organization down, it's really easy to set an organizational strategy. But then when you turn around, the teams and the individuals in the organization aren't ready. And it's almost like that if you were to put it in a football team, it's like having a coach that knows what the game plan is, but the players run out on the pitch and they just don't have the skills to win the game. And so I think I see that quite a lot, that the leaders of an organization know where they want to go. They know the game that they're playing. They know that they want to win, but they haven't invested the time coaching the players on the pitch, and the individual players as well to be able to get there. Conversely, through COVID, I've seen the opposite happening, where individuals have stood up and teams have, you know, done amazingly well because they've just had to adjust, and because things move so fast, almost like that organizational strategy fell away because it was the burning platform was here, and people just had to move quickly. And I think we saw some great outcomes from businesses and organizations that just stood up and got on with it. And I think it really proves what change is possible. And I hope that for some organizations, what's happened this year helps reframe what they are able to achieve when some of that organizational, I don't want to use the word governance, but that sort of strategic plan, you know, that they're almost unshackled and they're just left to get on with it, and adapt quickly. So I think, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of where we are with COVID, and I hope that we keep some of that agility, and we don't default back to, you know, here's our 3 to 5 year plan, and everyone's shackled to control.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you say that, because obviously being in the agile management space, you know, we've got the desire for people to be more agile, being at big A and small a. So I think this COVID situation, if anything, is one of the silver linings. It's going to have taught people how to be more flexible, more adaptable than maybe those that may have been scared to be like that, even the organizations that take that traditional waterfall approach with everything. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm excited just on the fact that it's been an opportunity for us to reflect on what we're doing. And I think that's the minimum that I would say people should be doing, is just reflecting, whether it's personally or professionally as well. Speaking of professional, so you have done a lot of different things. I actually was going through your profile the other day and was really surprised that you've taken a really interesting journey, right from project coordinator level, sort of early days project administration space, right up to GM level. Reminds me a little bit of sort of the journey that I took. But I'm curious that, you know, you work in strategy, projects, change, leadership, etc., and you do speaking and coaching. If you had to pick a favorite out of all of those, which one would it be?
I love coaching. Don't get me wrong, standing on stage and speaking about change is fantastic. It's great to inspire people, but coaching is where the change happens. So to work with leadership teams on how to lead change, to work with their leaders on what they can do to lead change, how they can overcome resistance and get the best out of their organizations and people, and actually make change positive, I think is my passion, and whether that's helping them with planning a strategy and a project, or whether that's actually helping them implement the change. That's I'm a big believer that coaching people to do that is the answer, and because leaders need to be able to do it, not me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also a good point that you reference again, leaders. Even if you're trying to coach throughout an organization, there's no point in just starting with any other level than the leadership, because if they're not on board, the change is just not going to happen, let's be honest. So it's great that you mentioned that. I think in terms of, looking at leadership and strengths and whatnot, we just had our team undertake a strengths profile test as part of this lockdown, and it's really interesting seeing the different results. What would you say are sort of the most essential traits of a successful leader?
I look for authenticity. So I think it's very easy as a leader to paint a picture of what you think people want to see. Whereas I think when a leader is authentic, they know what they know, and they also know what they don't know, and they're willing to have those conversations. And so I think that's the big thing that I look for. I think following on from that, I look for a determination and courage. And to me, that goes back to what I was saying about courage and strength. So are they willing to make the big calls, and are they determined to see them through? And time and again, I see transformation programs, change programs where we've had multiple leaders lead it, because for whatever reason, the leader that originally was at the helm has changed hands. And I really think I would love to see leaders own projects and change in the same way they own their business, P&L and everything else, and should take carriage of that on behalf of the organisations.
Yeah, I usually like to say that unless it's tied to their KPIs, it's probably not going to happen. It's going to be a while before they do that, but it would be great to see.
Tying it to their KPIs makes it sound like a stick, and I don't want it to be I don't want leaders to feel like they're tied to that stick, but to recognise that to achieve what they're already KPI'd for, so P&L, shareholder value, etc., that to achieve those things, the best chance they have, the enabler of those KPIs are the projects and the change. And so I think they already have the incentive to do it. I think the key is helping them understand how to get the value out of what they're doing, so that they achieve their KPIs.
And by coaching them, you're not doing the job for them. You're helping them to see what they need to do.
Yeah, I think every leader needs to be able to lead change.
Yeah.
If it's continuous, you're not going to get to the senior executive positions in any organisation if you haven't demonstrated that you've led change successfully. I just think it's a mandatory leadership skill now.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you a controversial one. Can anyone be a leader?
I think everyone is a leader. Okay. I look at my 10-year-old daughter, talking to her friends about school assignments, and I see leadership skills in her. I think we get caught up in the fact that leadership is a position on a hierarchy sometimes, and that by reporting to someone, it means they're the leader and you're not, in some organizations. But I think I know many people that work individually that lead great things, even though they don't lead people. And I think it's we could talk about that one all day, but I think everyone is a leader. I just think some leaders have more to lead than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes people don't realize that they are being leaders until maybe they're put under pressure or in a certain situation, as we've seen more recently as well. So good answer. As a leader, what has been one of the most difficult challenges you faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
I think so one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about courage and strength is, particularly on the strength side of things, when I've led large projects, large change transformations, is that strength, you need to maintain it. So I've run programs in the past where I've ended up incredibly burnt out. So I know how bad that can be, not just for myself personally, but my family, my team. And so one of the reasons I'm so passionate about that is that I've seen the worst of it. I know what it's like to almost feel quite broken. And so being able to, you're not going to be you can't just be a good leader for X number of months. You have to be able to be a leader continuously, and that means being able to look after yourself. And hard lesson learned. I'm sure many people listening to this will have been there as well. But we need to be able to lead continuously, and to do that, we need to be able to look after ourselves. And even the strongest sort of steel, if it's put under enough pressure, will break. And I think we need to be very self-aware of where we are for us to do the best job of what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as leaders, it's up to us, especially leading teams and working with other teams, to, effectively put actions and take the time to look after our mental health. If, we're not coping okay, it's okay to have bad days. So I always say to the team, you need to have a mental health day, just take the day off, it's fine. And just talking about it openly. It's one of the things that I try to stress to people as well. The more leaders talk about mental health and those sorts of things, the more it sort of reduces the stigma. So I think it's a key part of leadership as well, as being, like you said, back to being authentic, really. So it's awesome.
And I think for a lot of leaders, leaders that are leading change, they're doing it on top of everything else that they're also doing. So there's not many leaders that have the luxury of stepping away from their business as usual job to be 100% dedicated on a particular change, program. So being able to look at, if you are leading change on top of everything else that you're trying to do, be kind to yourself and look at how you can divvy up some of your business as usual sort of activity so that you can focus on change. Otherwise, it's the 100% commitment becomes 120, 30, 40, 50%, and that's when the burnout starts to occur.
Definitely. It's about prioritizing, I guess, what's important at that time. And that's probably another kind of key area. Like, how do you prioritize what's important?
I focus on what matters. So I'm a big fan of urgent versus important. And I think there's a lot of things that we've done this year that would be urgent. Urgent first and important second. And I think certainly over the next 3 to 6 months, I hope some of that starts to reverse and that we can get back to what are the important things that need to be done, and important in the context of our organizations, as opposed to what do we need to get done today and tomorrow.
It's interesting you say that, because most books you read and most podcasts we listened to prior to COVID, it was all about focus on the important, don't focus on the urgent. But I've never actually heard someone say flip it the other way because of the environment. It's actually really interesting and actually a really good point that even in business at the moment, we got to focus on getting by and making enough sales to keep the team employed, and if you're in a job, doing your best to stay hopefully in that job. So urgent is a really interesting point to make, and I think a lot of people will probably resonate with that really well. We talked about your career path, and as I said, when you look at your profile and sort of some of the roles you've done, the observation is that you were climbing the corporate ladder for a period of time, and that's what it sort of looks like. I'm interested to know that has that career path that you took in your career prior to starting your own business, was that path intentional, or was a little bit of chance as well?
I think everyone's career has a bit of both. I think it's fair to say. So I got into delivering projects when I was still at university. So I did management and computer science as an undergrad, and in my third year of industry, I went to work for IBM in London. And typical undergrad sort of program, I was meant to be on 3 or 4 rotations. This feels like a lifetime ago now, but I was meant to be on 3 or 4 rotations, and the first rotation they put me on was in IT, enterprise services. So my job was to go and install equipment for customer sites, on customer sites, and so that was sort of my very, very early introduction to working on projects. And I loved it so much for that first 3 months that when they told me I needed to move to marketing, I was like, no, I want to stay here and do this. And so I think some of it is luck, because I could have been put, my first rotation could have been somewhere very different. Some of it is design. So once I went back to university, I changed my final year to focus on project management. When I left university, I looked for jobs in project management, and just because I was good at it, I was given bigger and bigger projects. And I have sort of sat between project delivery and project governance. I've sat in waterfall, I've sat in agile, and so just evolved as the world's evolved. Projects have evolved incredibly over the last 20 years. The types of projects we're delivering, the amount of change we're doing. Change managers weren't even a thing when I started in project management, and now people are everything. I firmly believe that projects without people are pointless. So you've got to have the people piece. This is the foundation of every project success, I think.
And early on in your career, you also did quite a lot of work in the project management office space, or PMO for those who are more familiar to that term, something that I'm really passionate about. One of the things that I believe is genuinely a missing part of success of a PMO is change management. Do you agree?
I think they have responsibility for a type of change management. So I think change, if I look at pure change management, most people associate that with people change and comms. But I think there is a role to play in the PMO space, which is about broader change in terms of value and, are we achieving strategic vision? And is the shareholder value or the customer value that we're expecting to see come through? So I think they have carriage of a strategic change, for sure. But the doing of the change, if that makes sense, the actual helping people change, I think is better left with the leaders of the organizations that are changing.
I think you're right about the customer value. Some PMOs don't focus on the customer value; they focus on their own desires and what they want to do. But the ones that focus on the customer and then actually helping that customer are the ones that are more successful. So it's an interesting space to play in. Yeah. So hopefully they're listening, and those that are not focusing on customer value change their approach, because there's too many that just.
I once had a senior leader who was one of my stakeholders when I ran a PMO tell me that PMO stands for project management overhead, and it's sort of something that's stuck in my mind ever since. And there's such an opportunity in the PMO to create value, and to help our organizations create value if we can get above the governance and reporting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You obviously then went from corporate and you went into your own business. So what would be the advice that you could give to someone who maybe is in corporate at the moment and maybe they're an entrepreneur, and then thinking about moving into their own business? What are some of the tips that you can give them?
I think be really clear on what you're leaving for. So when I left corporate, a lot of people thought I would be a consultant. And even now, and I've run my own business for a couple of years now, people still think or like to put me in that consultant box. And I've actually done a lot of work to say, well, no, if you want a consultant, if you want to pay someone by the hour to give you advice or do this work for you, by all means, there's a long list of consultants that can help you with that. What I'm passionate about there is helping people do it themselves, and so I left to become a coach and a trainer, because I think it's a bit like teaching a person to fish, right? I can catch the fish for them, or I can teach them to fish. So I'm going to teach. I like to teach people to fish when it comes to project and change, because behind the projects they're doing now are more projects and more projects and more projects, and so they need to be able to do them all, not just pay me to do one. So I would be really, if you're thinking about leaving corporate, be really clear on what you're leaving for. I personally love the freedom that comes with running my own business, and I get to choose who I work with and the type of work that I do. That's incredibly liberating, having been in corporate. But it also comes with the flip side of the coin, which is everything that's in the bank account comes down to how well the business is doing, and you have to be willing to live in some of that discomfort, especially when things like COVID come along and, for example, all your face-to-face work disappears very quickly. So a lot of people ask, would I ever go back to corporate? I love working with my corporate clients. But I love the coaching and the training conversations that we have, and I love seeing them achieve what they want, and I'm proud that they're able to achieve it themselves, rather than the consultant cavalry arriving to do it for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of that. We're seeing quite a lot of that, some of the stuff in the competitive space where, let's just stick with what we're used to, and we'll just bring in the same consultancies and they can do all the work for us, which is, not really going to be sustainable change, because when they leave, they have to try to figure it out again, and then the following year they're back in again. So could probably talk about that one for a few hours. But I really like your comment, leaving for, like, I've listened to a lot of stories, and I've watched a lot of shows and listened to podcasts, and I've not really heard someone say, think about what you're leaving for. Knowing back sort of early in my first business that really didn't go anywhere, I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted freedom. So I just thought I'll just do a business. And so I think you need to, like you said, know what you're leaving for. So that's a really, really sound advice. So thank you for sharing. So I wanted to touch base on VID19. So you were one of the I think you were the first person in my network that I saw doing anything to do with online virtual events. And you were literally someone that obviously identified an opportunity and then ran a completely virtual online experience. I want to talk about that, but why don't you just tell everybody what VID19 was?
Yeah, so back in March 2020, so this was the week that I think Australia was about to go into lockdown. I think it was a week before New Zealand was about to go into lockdown. Over the space of a few days, myself and a lot of my peers who run their own speaking coaching businesses all started to get phone calls from our clients saying that work was being cancelled or deferred, and as organisations started to send people home. And I went out for dinner with a couple of friends. I think it's probably the last dinner I've had. I don't think I've actually
so many years ago.
But when I went for dinner with a couple of friends, and we were just talking about where, what was going to happen. And in a taxi on the way home, I was like, okay, well, I can see two problems. The first problem is that all of a sudden a lot of people are going to be at home, and they're going to need support. And the second problem is that there's a whole lot of speakers and coaches and trainers that are suddenly got a lot of time on their hands. So there's a problem, and then there's an opportunity in that. How do I bring them together? And literally in the taxi on the way home, so why don't I run a conference? Why don't I run a virtual event? And so that was the Friday the 13th of March. Not that I'm superstitious, but it was Friday the 13th. And the Wednesday after, so three business days later, the conference went live. And I think if I was to sum up all of the conversation that we've had, the military, my military upbringing, all of my project management experience, it was 3 days just to create this conference. And not satisfied with it being a 1 or 2 day conference, I decided that I would run it for 19 days. Wow. No other reason that it was COVID-19, and I thought 19 was a symbolic number. It was about as creative as it was, but we basically streamed from my house in Fitzroy North in Melbourne for 19 days. So it was a bit like Leadership Live Aid, only without Bob Geldof, or I was maybe playing the role of Bob Geldof. But we we had such an amazing response. I think we had 15,000 people join, 32 different countries, 172 speakers put their hand up. So yeah, every speaker spoke for free, and it was just a platform. It was an amazing platform for anyone that was at home to get something. So we talked about mental health and well-being. We talked about change. We talked about comms, leadership. Such a broad range of topics. But that was me doing what I do best, which is seeing a problem and identifying an idea and just implementing it very quickly and bringing people together to be able to do that, which is the best form of change in my view. So by me standing up, other people showed up, and collectively we all turned it into this amazing thing.
Yeah, you had such an abundance of speakers from all over the world. To get that many people to even just agree, and in such a short period of time, like I don't even think an Agile sprint goes that long. Like, it's just an incredible effort, and probably mayhem at your house for those 3 days. I'm guessing you probably didn't see your family at all.
Well, we were all staying home, so they actually got to see me quite a bit. We got to see each other quite a bit, and my husband Justin did an amazing job keeping me fed and watered. But I think I've reflected on it quite a lot, and a few people have said, "Oh, what made it work?" And I think the best ideas need to be done in the right time frames. And if I had done it in anything other than 3 days, if I'd gone away and planned it for 30 days, it wouldn't have had the impact that it had. I could have gone away and planned it for 30 days. I could have made it a 3-day conference rather than a 19-day conference. So I've reflected quite a lot on what made this great idea work the way that it did. And I think that the timing and doing it at the speed that it did made it work exponentially more. And I think it's something that I would encourage everyone that's listening to think about, is not just, is it a great idea, but what time frame does it need to be done in for it to be really great?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting point. I get told by my husband a lot of the time that, you spend too much time planning, because I'm a planner and got anxiety. So I'm always like, a little bit OCD on a few things, if I'm honest. I genuinely am. So, it's fascinating to see that you did that. But it goes back to, I saw some of the behind the scenes images of, the way that you'd set up your computer. And it wasn't even like you had a, fantastically professional recording studio or anything, but you made it happen. So it's just reminds me of the idea of being done rather than perfect, but the output of it was just incredibly amazing. So well done, and it was very authentic from what I've seen. You've obviously probably now seen a flurry of online events, and I'm every second week I'm hearing about 1 or 2 new ones. What's some advice that you can give to anyone else who's thinking about doing an online event, be it COVID or outside of COVID?
I think that events are a vehicle for something else, and what you've got to be clear on is what that something else is. So for VID19, it worked because the something else was everyone suddenly is at home and they're going to need support. How can I help them? So there was a very clear need. I see events being run because it's the only real platform that we have at the moment. So people are running events to reach out to people. Well, that's your need, not their need. So I think if we can get beyond, we're running an event to promote our business, or we're running an event because we normally have it face to face and it's our annual conference and we should have it, and we need to have it anyway. We need to get beyond that conversation and go to, what do people actually need? What problem are we trying to solve? What's the value that we want people to take away? Because I don't know how many online events I've been to this year, a lot, and they're when we're time poor and getting digitally tired, the thought of going to another one, it means it's got to be something really special. It's got to help me change or transform something, make some part of my life better than it currently is, and just calling it an event for an event isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points. And I think you were really, like I said, a bit of luck, a bit of chance, and a bit of just brilliance. You caught everyone before Zoom fatigue kicked in. So well done on that. Definitely good timing.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was just going to touch on that we talked about just very briefly is you also came up with the book Unite. Now, I'd like to know, was Unite always you thought of it before or during the event process, or did you realize after the event was successful and completed that you wanted to create a book? Like, where did that idea come from?
So after VID19 finished, I basically had 172 hours of content. So all of this content that had been created, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, Cameron Swab, about what to do with all of it and what comes next. And we talked about doing a book and to curate some of the key messages that came out of VID19 into a leadership book called Unite. And I think it was a great idea that really appealed, because I think it's great to run a virtual event, but I've personally been craving a lot of tangible things. So creating Unite is a hardback book. It's very tactile. It's something you can hold. You can disconnect from online and actually sit and read over a cup of tea. And the book came out as an idea maybe 3 or 4 weeks after VID19 had finished. But the momentum to do it probably came from the fact that we've been in this COVID world now, I think, longer than originally many of us, myself included, would think that we were going to be, and that we're going to continue to need help into next year, in the year after, or whenever a vaccine arrives. So I wanted to take some of the hopeful and courageous messages that came from VID and sort of put them in a form that can sit on a bookshelf that people can just pick up and read. And there's 13 chapters in it, and each one's written by one of the speakers from VID19. So it's not just my insights, it's other people's insights as well, which just goes back to what the value was in VID19, is there's this curated messages from experts that have just great lived experience that I think can benefit many, many people.
Amazing. And so where can people get more information to work with you, or more information on the book and the conference?
So you can catch me at juliasteele.com. All of the recordings from VID19 are at VID19Conference.com. So they're all there and available for free. If people want to jump there, they can watch to their heart's content. And then Unite is at unitethebook.com. And they're all interconnected. So if you go to one, you'll be able to find the others. But unitethebook.com to order a copy of the book.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciated all of your time. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder before we finish up for today?
I just think be aware of where we are. Recognise that there's been a lot of change, but there's more coming, and do everything that you can to get yourself the most prepared for it. Whether you're a leader, a team member, start to understand what's going on with yourself and how you adapt and react to change, and lean into it. It's an opportunity for us to grow.
Awesome. Thank you so much. A very helpful advice. I think there's a lot of takeaways. Even for me, I was scribbling notes frantically, thinking about ideas that you've just inspired, to move forward with. So really thank you. Appreciate your time. Look forward to receiving the book, and I will definitely be checking out some more of those conference videos. So thank you, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful.
Well, that was awesome, wasn't it? Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Julia Steele, and make sure to check out her website for more information. I will include all of the details in the show notes. And make sure you are following us on LinkedIn. Look for Agile Ideas on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or on Pinterest. You'll find us. Make sure that you reach out and let me know if there's any particular topics or that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, what you like, what you don't like. Any feedback will be welcome at any time. So make sure you get in touch. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you all soon. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We welcome any feedback. Please let us know by going to www.agilemanagementoffice.com/Agile Ideas. You can also find us on most social media channels by searching Agile Ideas or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. Please share or rate this if you enjoyed it. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, think, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?